The state fair is here, but there's still no state budget. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenberg from the State Journal-Register. Yes, there's still the State House mess going on downtown Springfield, but the State Fair is starting. Here to talk about it with me, a couple of guys who work at the State House. Matt Porter, Capitol Bureau Chief, WCIA-TV.
Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome. Andy Maloney is back, State House Bureau Chief for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin.
Good to be here as always.
Okay, gentlemen, the House was in this last week. There was a fight over a bill to have the legislature pass to provide yet another bunch of money that the state can spend. In this case, it's about $5 billion in federal money. Ultimately, the House voted to spend that, and the governor is on board. The House Speaker Michael Madigan, they wanted to add some extras to that, which they said was needed to either take care of people in need or match federal dollars. The governor didn't want that because of the out-of-balance budget, which we still don't have set. So where's it going?
Well, I think what we saw from the House this week was similar to what they've been doing every week, which is we've got these programs, they're in dire need, child care, meals, and we can't forget them. And so in this federal funding bill, which we all expected to be one and done, in and out, the House said, no, we want to remember these child care and elder care programs, and that's what they added on. Of course, the Republicans, as they've been saying all summer long, no, 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 not without a balanced budget. This isn't going to happen, and that's what we saw.
The governors and Republicans called it a poison pill to add those state funds, and Speaker Madigan had a press conference and said he's offended, or basically that they would call help for child care or whatever a poison pill, people in need, cancer screenings. But still, the broader question, Andy, is are they any closer to an agreement on the full budget?
It's not looking like it, and I think the more we stay in continuous session, the more we kind of realize that a big chunk of the budget is still happening despite the lack of the appropriations from the legislature. This week, the Senate Democrats estimated that about 90%, I think, of the budget is basically accounted for when you compare it to previous budget years. It's going out in large part because of court orders.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little. So it's weird from past years. In past years, the pressure would build early in July and certainly within 2 weeks, because if state employees don't get paid and then they're told not to come to work, or there's and not that we've had a shutdown, but that was always the pressure that made something happen if you have a governor and a legislature not getting along. This year, courts have ordered that all state employees continue to get paid, that there are, I guess, some consent decrees that other programs have to be paid. Now we've got $5 billion in federal pass-through money that the legislature and the governor are agreeing to pay. The comptroller certainly wants to pay these bills, and so there are some social service agencies and some building projects that have been held up, but again, most of state government is operating. Can they operate for an entire year on court orders and consent decrees?
It's not the ideal way to operate. I don't think you'd get a lot of people to try and make that case, but when folks who are very sympathetic, you're talking about folks, DCFS children, patients with mental illnesses in community homes, when they're not getting money and people represent them in court and say, you have to keep these people basically in homes or in shelter and with food and other sorts of resources. When a court looks at that, a lot of times if they've got a case, they'll try to keep the status quo in place. And what the status quo is typically you have money to operate from. And so that's kind of the rationale underpinning all of these consent decrees and court orders. And we saw this week from Governor Rauner's attorneys in a House Revenue Committee that they're not big fans of those types of things. Those judges stepping in and saying, we've got to keep Medicaid money flowing, we've got to keep human service money flowing, because it's what we've done in the past when those spigots have been turned off.
Right. Of course, part of the situation here. The tax structure that we have, which is the lower income tax, because it came down at the beginning of the year from 5% on individuals to 3.75, the money is still coming in, so there's still money to pay this. But in the grand scheme, we still have like the $4, $5, $6 billion gap.
Well, you have less
between if they were going to fund everything, and that's why we're looking for some compromise between the governor and the General Assembly, which is not yet there.
Well, I think that's what's most worrying. If we're going by the status quo of last year, that was a budget that was meant for a higher income tax. Now we've got an income tax that's lower, so that status quo doesn't match up without a revenue increase. And one thing, I did a story on this this week, which is, what's the next pressure point? Certainly the vendors who are getting paid based on last year's accounts, so they're still a little bit behind. So the vendor pressure hasn't been there. And then the next major pressure point is higher education. The universities are operating without hundreds of millions of dollars they would normally get, and now many of them have said, we're going to get through this fall semester, we're prepared, the university is going to open on time. But what happens when they start planning for spring semester? Not every university is like the U of I, or UIC, and they're going to have to find ways to balance the budget when they're not getting in all of that state revenue that they would normally be getting.
As long as we're talking about universities, and it is true that that's one of the points of contention. The governor clearly wants less money to go, certainly to administration. Let's just divert a little and talk about the administration situation at U of I this week. We have Chancellor, I believe, Phyllis Wise, who basically had an agreement to leave her job after it came out that she had been using personal email for some touchy subjects going on at the U of I, including hiring of a professor or denying him access to the campus because of some anti-Israeli tweets, etc.
Right.
So she was kind of on the hot seat as these were being released. She made an agreement to be given she makes more than $500,000 a year. There was an agreement that the Board of Trustees was going to pay her $400,000 and then give her a year sabbatical and then hire her back, I think, at $300,000 a year as a professor. And many people looked at this in the state is in and said, this isn't right. The governor himself issued a statement saying, we don't think the Board of Trustees should give her $400,000 for leaving in this situation. And ultimately the Board of Trustees, including Karen Hesera, who's a former mayor of Springfield, decided not to give her that.
Well, I think that was ultimately the decision. The resignation policy was written as such, and clearly when they were looking at what Chancellor Wise had been doing, and as things were breaking out, that bonus just didn't seem to make sense, and they had to reject her resignation and instead basically say, well, we're just going to reassign you. So essentially you're still hired, you never leave the university, and you're just being moved to a teaching position. The U of I has had a number of sort of scandal-like stories the past year. They said this has been distracting from the university policy, and I think they're now just trying to move Chancellor Wise to the back burner, to a position where she's not going to get that attention, and hopefully the university thinks that they can move on from this.
Yeah, well,
the university, you said in the last year, which is absolutely true, and it's a number of things, but it also goes back even further. I mean, since 2008, 2009, we've had administrative fallout at the U of I with politicians here in Springfield being accused of clouding
influence on who gets admissions,
who gets into
the separate
the
list of admissions.
Right, and so I think it's something like 4 or 5 different presidents in the last 5 or 6 years, and so this is kind of adding to that recent legacy with the administrative troubles.
And they don't need these things at this time when the state budget is under such scrutiny, and
exactly.
The university depends so much upon that. A lot of state workers in Central Illinois, and of course the biggest union of state workers is AFSCME, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. More than 30,000 state workers. There's a contract that expired with the new fiscal year, and then there was an extension for a month, and the new fiscal year began July 1. So they're basically operating right now either on the old contract or without a contract, and the legislature is trying to pass something that basically says there can be no strike or lockout in such a situation, and it should go to an arbitrator, I believe, arbitration. Right. But the governor said that would be a war on taxpayers because arbitrators usually take the union side. So where are we with this?
Well, it was really interesting to see the AFSCME union decide, well, we want to see an independent arbitrator now. This is something they haven't really been for decades, and that's because it would take their negotiating power as well. The union cedes some of its power when they say, let's go to an independent arbitrator. But I think with what we've seen from the leaked negotiations, Bruce Rauner wanting a full 4-year wage freeze, and where the AFSCME workers stand,
big increase in healthcare costs.
They think they stand to gain with an independent arbitrator than they will ever with Governor Bruce Rauner. And I think that's now where everything is stuck, is because Bruce Rauner has come in, he's the new governor. He wants a more favorable contract in his terms, and he thinks he might be able to get it. Whether AFSCME thinks that's going to happen is questionable. And the thing is, with the budget negotiations happening at the same time, we all have to wonder, are they really willing to get in the morass in another dicey negotiation? I think we were all wondering what was going to happen, and suddenly they extended the contract negotiations another a month and a half, and I think we're going to see that continue until the budget is fixed, and then then Bruce Rauner has to pick up his second and maybe even larger fight with state workers.
Right. Technically, and I'm not exactly sure, I believe the governor vetoed the legislation.
He did veto. He vetoed the legislation for an independent arbitrator, which now the Senate is expected to pick up and maybe pass. They will have to have the 3/5
for override,
and then we'll have to go to the House. But at the same time, until they finish the budget negotiations, I don't know if they're even going to get to the stuck point where they're going to call in an independent arbitrator. I think that would almost be too much all at the same time.
We'll see how it goes. Now, the Senate is supposed to come in
next week,
next Wednesday, which is Governor's Day at the State Fair, because the State Fair is getting underway. Governor's Day is Wednesday, when depending on who's the Republicans will be apparently having their rallying points and getting behind the governor, we assume, and then Democrat Day is Thursday. So the Senate is supposed to be in on Governor's Day and might override a governor's veto on Governor's Day, which would divert a little attention, but everybody will have their say. Do you think, Andy, that taxpayers are upset the State Fair is going on as the budget is in this situation, or is this the way things should be? Because to end the State Fair right now means a big economic hit to Springfield and a lot of fun people would otherwise not have.
It's hard to say. I haven't seen any straw polls on what people think about the State Fair as it pertains to the budget situation. But I think it is something that I think if you look at it, people see, we're still paying state workers. Government really isn't completely shut down. In fact, a lot of it is still operating. So what's the harm in, still having Sammy Hagar come and still going to see the butter cow and all of that stuff. I think
there are so many contracts that are out there already for entertainment and tickets sold, and vendors who actually have to pay the state to sell their products. On the fairgrounds.
And that's an important thing for a lot of people across the state. It's not just the people who are going there to attend and have a good time. It's also the vendors and folks selling, their product at the state fair, and that certainly wouldn't be. It would become an easy target, I guess, for whichever political side wanted to play that card of you're kind of hurting businesses.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing to note that most of the vendors at the State Fair are paid vendors. They're paying to be there.
Right, they rent space to sell their stuff.
So it's a business, it's a business venture.
Yeah, I guess in the broad perspective, just, if anybody's been living like in Nebraska for a while and not watching Illinois, the big fight at the State House is the governor wants his turnaround agenda before he'll agree to new revenue to fill the budget hole of, $4 billion or so. And that includes some elements that would erode union power locally, and at certainly public employee unions. He wants local governments to be able to decide if prevailing wages will be paid on their projects, and he wants local governments, as part of his pension plan, to decide if or to limit collective bargaining so that many things cannot be collectively bargained with local units of government. And so teachers are opposed to this, and Democrats have union support, and the governor really wants changes that erode union power, and the Democrats say you're going against our core beliefs. So are we going to be any closer at any time soon to them, both sides reaching agreement so they can actually do a budget deal?
I think the short answer to that is no.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've seen no real will on either side to have a hard shutdown. The governor could, if he wanted, say, we're not having a state fair due to budget shortfalls. We're not, having any of the museums open due to budget. He could do a lot of things to make it a hard shutdown and maybe drive people back to the negotiating table. And the Democrats could do similar things to try to, say this shutdown is terrible. They didn't necessarily even need to pass, favorable budgets in the first place that Rauner could accept. And so what we've seen is a very soft shutdown. State government continues to work. 2/3 to 90% of the budget is funded. And so not a majority of people are hurting right now. Certainly poor elderly people affected by those human services that aren't being funded are, but state workers are being paid, Medicaid bills are being paid. And until we see, I think, a real pressure point to drive them to the table, I think we're going to continue to have continuing session press conference from Speaker Michael Madigan every week.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I know that one thing coming up, and probably in the long-term plan of Governor Rauner, is that he would continue to explain his side and try to also use money that he has in various accounts and other campaign funds that are with him to try to influence legislative races in 2016. But again, you're talking a year off, and you're talking after a whole other year of legislative session to try to get more Republicans in the legislature so that Democrats don't have such a stranglehold on everything that goes on in the House and the Senate. But that's a long way off, and I'm not sure if where blame will lie once all of this comes, continues to play out in front of the public.
Yeah, and you never want to sort of put all of your eggs in the electoral basket, I guess. The 2016 is a presidential year,
which means a lot of
Democratic vote, especially, hard to predict where things are going to be next November, but if Hillary Clinton comes out and survives the primary, the surge from Bernie Sanders and everything else going on.
What a funny name.
You would expect, at least on its face, for a lot of Democratic voters to still be enthusiastic about coming out and supporting her as a candidate. And that's without even considering who the Republican is, which could matter. But that certainly has an impact at the local level in a state legislative race.
I wandered into a Sangamon County Democratic Party event this last week, and Senator Durbin was there, and U.S. Senator Durbin, State Senator Andy Maloney. They both made basically the same point. They think people are upset with Governor Rauner, but that's, of course, they say their hang is from everybody, but they hang around a lot of Democrats, obviously. But Senator Durbin also mentioned that there were only 49, and I checked it, he's right, there was only 49% turnout in the 2014 election in Illinois, in the general election when Governor Rauner was elected. But in presidential years, in recent years, the turnout is about 70%. You do get a much bigger turnout, and we have gone for Democrats, including like Al Gore, significantly over George W. Bush in recent years. So, he is saying no matter what the governor is doing and no matter what he spends, it's going to be a good Democratic year. So we'll see how that plays out. Given all of this controversy we've been talking about, let's also recall that the legislature has accomplished some things. One of them led to a bill signing within the last week about police training, use of body cameras. If you happen to get a traffic ticket starting next year, it'll be $5 more to pay for some of this. But Andy, it's a pretty significant change. Can you kind of fill us in?
Yeah, and if you're kind of an idealist and you want to see sort of government taking action on something that's a big ticket sort of item and certainly starts out controversial and then comes to compromise, this is kind of your bill. It's, it wouldn't mandate that police all across the state use body cameras, but it would allow them to opt in and have those be funded, like you said, by the $5 traffic ticket. But it also includes a lot of training elements. Police would be, the mandatory cultural sensitivity training and, sort of teaching what biases are and how to prevent them in the line of duty would all be part of this as well. And there are, of course, regulations on what to do with the video that police who are using the department
have to maintain them. I heard 90
days, or if it's flagged as evidence
years.
in a case, then it would go for 2 years, right? It would also set procedures for judges on how to use the videotape in those types of cases.
And what's interesting too, I mean, obviously we don't want Illinois to have incidents, or you hope not, as have been in some areas in the country with police and community people, having fatal encounters. But what's also interesting is that major police organization, I know the Fraternal Order Police, was right on board with these changes. So everybody really did agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the Sheriff's Association and a lot of other police groups.
Gotcha. All right, well, we'll see how that plays out. Aaron Schock is still in the news. He was a congressman who represented part of Springfield, comes from Peoria, still being looked at by a federal grand jury over his campaign and I believe office spending as well.
Right. Well, I got to look. The grand jury finally released some documents, actually more than 1,000 pages of documents from the summer's grand jury, and I got to look at about half of them. And essentially, what they tell you is that Aaron Schock and the federal prosecutors really dislike each other at this point.
Okay.
Aaron Schock feels that what the prosecutors asked for, and they subpoenaed him the day before he resigned for all his documents as a congressman almost, and they wanted in his congressional offices here in Illinois and in the House, they want it all. And Aaron Schock is like, this is oppressive, unreasonable are the words that he used. They've asked the prosecutors to narrow down somehow, and they said they can't possibly even review the documents with the attorneys before they send them to the prosecutor. On the other hand, the federal prosecutor is saying, we've subpoenaed you back in April, you've had all this time, we want to hold you in contempt. And they were talking about, charging Aaron Schock $5,000 a day, and this is money he wouldn't be able to use as campaign money to pay for. What ultimately seemed to happen in the documents is that they gave Aaron Schock a little more time to get his act together and get some of the documents to the prosecutor. The other interesting thing, Aaron Schock claiming the Fifth Amendment. And saying some of his documents are protected with immunity. And so there's a lot of legal debate about what documents he can and cannot give over. And if this is what we're seeing in the grand jury, just imagine this is the beginning of a long criminal trial, I think.
We'll see where that ends up. Now, of course, we've already had a special primary back in July 7th, I think, to fill Aaron Schock's seat because of his resignation last March. And Darren LaHood is the Republican candidate, and Rob Mellon, that's right, if I could read my own writing and remember, because I saw him Monday at the Democratic event. He's from Quincy and a military guy and a teacher, is the Democrat, but this is an overwhelmingly Republican
district,
the 18th congressional district.
And Senator LaHood just has a lot of people backing him. He has far more in campaign cash than Rob
he's
Mellon.
over $1 million. And Mellon actually signed some agreement with a do-gooder group that he won't raise more than $150,000, which is easy to say when you're not going to,
well,
but I don't mean to minimize.
Right, but it's certainly, this is David versus Goliath here. Mr. Mellon is a teacher in Quincy. Senator LaHood is an active political person. His father, served on a cabinet and been in Congress. So it's a very difficult race for Mr. Mellon to win, not even just because it's a Republican district. What will be interesting to see is how the two perform on the only televised debate I think they're going to have out of Washington, Illinois.
There will be a radio one and newspaper one also at the SJR
so
with a local
how they
station,
perform
WMAY.
When you put them on equal footing is going to be very interesting, and that probably is Mr. Mellon's only chance to get above the Darren LaHood political machine that has been running through the summer.
Right, and with his funding, we're going to see a lot of advertising for Darren LaHood, which is what most people, for better or worse, get their information in elections from, or many people. And Mr. Mellon clearly is not going to be heavy on the advertising spending because he's just, all are parts of 19 counties in the 18th congressional district. State Representative Raymond Poe, who represents Springfield, said that he's been through some health issues, but he said he's running for another term, so that's kind of interesting. What's also interesting to me is he represents a lot of state employees, and he has broken a little bit with the governor on some stuff, including voting on a panel he was on to recommend that the state museum stay open. It's one of the things that the governor has said should be closed if we don't get a budget agreement, and that's raised a lot of hassle from a lot of people. U.S. Senator Mark Kirk has also been in the news, partly because after his stroke a few years ago, he had a caregiver that got like $43,000 in campaign payments, but the Kirk campaign says that was all for campaign work. So obviously, Tammy Duckworth, a congressperson from the north suburbs of Chicago, or from the suburbs of Chicago, is one of the Democratic candidates. How's that race shaping up?
Senator Kirk has been thought of, I think, for a while as one of the most vulnerable Republicans going into this election, and he's, I would say, made a few stumbles. He's said some things that have gotten a lot of media attention, and so that didn't necessarily help. And Tammy Duckworth, obviously, is a candidate who has experience, and the Democrats are going to have a decent chance, and probably a good chance of taking back that seat.
Yeah, I know one of the other candidates is Andrea Zopp, who I think heads the Urban League in Chicago,
Yeah.
On the Democratic side, although
Right.
I know Senator Durbin is for Tammy Duckworth, and she is basically, she's a war hero. She was, shot down her helicopter. She has...
And this thing with the aid coming up this week is going to get controversial. Senator Kirk says during the day she did political work.
He.
Yeah,
It was
he.
he.
Sorry, he.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he, that he was doing political work and not engaging in personal care. But what happens if they find out that he was doing some of his personal care duties during the afternoon? It could just get messy for Senator Kirk.
We'll see where it goes. I would mention quickly the emails. Nationally, Hillary Clinton has been in trouble for how she used email. Beth Purvis is our governor's consultant on education, $250,000 a year. And I think it was the Associated Press was demanding her emails for a long time that were on a private system, or her private email address. And the administration kept denying releasing them. But then when the governor made a statement publicly, well, all of our emails are public, should be done on public things, then she did release, I guess, more than 60 of them.
Yeah, it was an email to one of the Chicago papers. And they did release a bunch of emails, and I got a chance to look at some of the emails. A lot of them were, congratulations, so glad you're, the new Secretary of Ed, good luck. But the one email that I think was really might have been controversial is the fact that she laid out the governor's education strategies, and these documents were all marked confidential. They were clearly public documents.
And should be there.
There's your mistake.
And there we go. All right, well, we will talk more. Matt Porter, Andy Maloney, thanks for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenberg. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time on Capitol View.